repairing lathe paintwork in the workshop. When I refurbished my Myford ML7R Lathe, I missed a bit of the damaged paintwork, and the time has now come to repair it. This is a close-up shot and it really does look bad. It's not quite as bad as it looks, but it's bad enough. According to the serial number, this lathe was manufactured between the late 70s and sometime in the mid-80s. It's showing its age with a few battle scars. Thinking about it though, I looked a lot better in the late 70s and mid-80s. The first thing I'm going to use is a specialist tool. It's called a steel rule, and I'm digging out as much of the chipped and loose paintwork as I can. And yes, I am aware that this job would have been easier and more logical had I have used one of my Proxxon motor tools. But this way works, and in no time at all I dug through the paintwork into the rust layer. This rusty hole in the headstock paintwork needs a little bit of degreasing, and for that I'm using methylated spirit. And of course my trusty toothbrush. The plan is to degrease the area and then scrape out all the rust, and apply more methylated spirit to wash out the rust particles. In this clip I'm using a piece of 400 grade wet-to-dry sandpaper, and apart from being very useful for making a key for the new paint, I'm also removing some of the old paint around the edge. I used this wet-to-dry sandpaper wet, but using methylated spirit. I alternated between the wet-to-dry sandpaper and the toothbrush to get a good and clean finish on the job. This job took a little bit longer than I'm showing on here, and after a while, with a cloth and some more methylated spirit, I wiped down the entire surface of the job. I used a screwdriver point to scrape out the rust from the hole, and I think it will be fine now. This job does not need to be perfect, it needs to match the paintwork on the rest of the lathe. I am not repainting a car, but this product is something that car painters use. I assume so because I bought this from an automotive paint supplier. It is cellulose putty and very useful stuff to use, but you cannot put it on thick. If you do, it will take ages to dry and probably crack. I could have used Catalloy paste, ordinary body filler, to fill the hole, but the hole isn't very deep, so this should be fine. I'm just making sure that it's hitting the bottom of the hole. I'm really pressing it firmly into the hole using my steel rule, and then I apply some more of the stuff over the top. It really is best not to mess about with things like this too much. As I applied the putty, there was a bit of a blob left over, and the more I messed about with it, the worse it got. I had to apply some more. And when I did that, the new application with the steel rule dragged it out of the hole, and it looked a bit of a mess. I think it's time to start again. This is a tutorial for beginners, and I am not an idiot, and I am not stupid, and I am not a professional painter or a professional machinist. I'm actually a musician. But thankfully, at my age, the brain cells that I've got left are still fairly functional. This is a tin of standard cellulose thinners, and I brushed on some of this to smooth out the cellulose stopper. The next thing to do is to allow time to elapse so the cellulose stopper dries. After about 4 hours, I opened this tin of Craftmaster Paint's Myford Grey. This, by the way, is really good paint, and it's what I used when I renovated the lathe in the first place last year. It's very easy to apply and gives excellent coverage. It doesn't seem to sag or run as much as some paints, and here I'm even filling an indentation on the edge with it. Now it's time to vacate the workshop and come back in 24 hours. It's good weather for painting, it's quite warm. And when I came back 24 hours later, this is what it looked like. Oh dear, did I neglect to mention that cellulose putty generally shrinks as it dries? And I didn't even rub the cellulose putty down. I applied the paint straight over the top of the cellulose putty after just painting on some cellulose thinners to flatten it off. I like to show sometimes what happens if you do it wrong. It's not the end of the world, as you'll see very shortly. 24 hours later, this paint isn't rock hard, but it's hard enough to allow me to use some 1200 grade wet-to-dry sandpaper, which in this case I'm going to use wet. This 1200 grade wet-to-dry sandpaper is very fine, and it rubs down the work perfectly. Very soon I'm through the new grey paint layer, as well as any high points of the cellulose putty. I'm even rubbing through to the original primer coat around the damaged part. I kept the area and the sandpaper wet at all times, and it's looking quite good now. I cannot feel any indentation. I wiped the surface of the work with my cloth to remove the water, and then went over the area very lightly with my Proxon blowtorch. This will evaporate any water that's left on there. I'm not really applying much heat. If I overheat the work, the paint will blister and I'll have to start again. The time has come to open the tin of Craftmaster Myford Grey, and once again I must stress this is excellent paint, and here I'm applying it very gently with a paintbrush. For this job I've selected a paintbrush that's quite small and has very soft bristles. I may need to give this another coat, but for the moment, even as it is, it's looking very good. It's definitely looking better than it did before I started the job. The problem that I have though is I do not want it to look perfect. This new paintwork needs to match the old paintwork. And it does not want to have the paint finish of my car, which I took into a professional body shop very recently. The new paint on the front of the headstock needs to look a bit like the paint on the back of the headstock, which is less than perfect. Perfection is a very relative term. Stay safe, stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.